I'll read one more quote just to get us started. This is from Martin Luther. God writes the gospel not in the Bible alone, but also on trees and in the flowers and clouds and stars. And now I will turn it over to Neil, Tom.
Good morning to all of you. Thank you for staying and attending this session. Before I forget, you heard Elizabeth Marie mention the walk this afternoon. I don't know if any of you were planning to come, but it just happened to be the one afternoon in a 2-week span for it to rain. But the walk will sort of go on, but we will be meeting. We were planning to meet in front of the Methodist Church down the street, University Methodist. We're still going to meet there. We're going to meet inside in their chapel, and that's where there'll be about a half an hour program, and then the walk will be optional depending on you and the weather. So no pressure, but we'd love to have you come to the program. I also want to thank Karen for incorporating Creation Care into her sermon today, and her remarks were right on target and consistent with a message I think you'll hear this morning. We appreciate, again, as Elizabeth Marie said, the 3 sessions that we've been allocated for adult formation. We understand that that's unusual and a real gift to us. This Sunday we're going to discuss, hopefully interactively with you, the religious and moral basis for Creation Care. And next Sunday we'll share what the Chapel of the Cross is doing to reduce our carbon footprint and function more sustainably. And we'll be highlighting the recently installed solar power system with the panels that are up on the roof now, and it should be up and going by next Sunday, we hope. And on the third Sunday, we'll hear about steps you can take in your individual lives to protect the environment, including how you can advocate for legislation and policies that the Episcopal Church promotes. So to kick off this morning, I'd like you to reflect on the big picture about humans' relationship with God's creation. And we first have to start with a little gloom and doom. Sorry. But we have to face up to the fact that the current rate of human consumption of the Earth's resources is not sustainable. These resources are finite and are being depleted every year at an accelerating rate that threatens the future of both humans and non-human life on this Earth. For example, 1/3 of the Earth's forests have been destroyed. Scientists estimate that 75% of the Earth's land area are substantially degraded. And since 1970, the size of the bird population in the United States and Canada has decreased by 25%, or 3 billion with a B birds. And 90% of the world's marine fish stocks are overexploited or depleted. And finally, global warming and rising sea levels, which are largely attributable to the burning of fossil fuels by the wealthiest nations, is making climate change refugees of the world's poorest populations. It's estimated that 200 million people will be displaced by climate change by the year 2050. Yesterday I attended a forum at Binkley Baptist Church where Corinna Gore identified 3 transitions that we must make to turn this picture around. First, implement practical and technological practices to reduce the amount of greenhouse gases that are produced. Secondly, make cultural and moral changes in our value systems and our commitment to equity across the globe. And thirdly, adopt a respectful relationship with nature in which we see ourselves as part of a larger ecosystem rather than viewing ourselves as superior to non-human beings. In today's presentation, Keith will first discuss what as Christians should be our relationship with God's creation, and then I'll share some of the beliefs of indigenous people about what a healthy and sustainable relationship with nature looks like. And after that, we'll open the floor to discuss questions that we'll be posing to you, and then we'll finish up with some encouraging news to balance the gloom and doom about the progress that we are making on addressing some of these issues. So, Keith?
Morning, y'all. Morning. Oh, yeah. We'll change the slide. As Neil already said, and I think looking around, most people here were at the 9, right? Or the 9 o'clock service. Man, the Reverend Dr. Karen did a far better job with a theology for creation care than I could do. And so but if there's anything that I could add to that, I guess I will try. And if you haven't heard her sermon yet, I commend it to you. Wonderful. It was wonderful. But when I think about Christians' relationship with the world, I often have 2 concepts in my mind. And this is a reminder that we are all creatures, and the reminder that we are all stewards. What I mean by the first category, creatures, is, I don't know about you, but I spend so much time in my daily life in completely human-made spaces that I can forget sometimes that we aren't separate from nature, but are inherently a part of it. And this is something that we see all the time over and again in scriptures, whether it's creation stories in Genesis or comments that are made in the Psalms about God's creation of the heavens and the earth. What I have up there, that's not my picture, but that's a picture of Lonesome Lake in New Hampshire from one of my favorite hikes I've ever done. And I put that in there too because I think that's one of the ways in which we are reminded of this is when we spend meaningful time in nature and people are struck by feelings of awe or feelings of transcendence or feelings of both belonging to this thing that is much larger than ourselves. I was reminded of this concept too. I reread something by a Jewish scholar and a Jewish perspective. I love this, talking about the order of creation and asking the question, why were humans not made until the 6th day? And it was to give us humility so that when we were complaining, God could be like, what are you talking about? Even the mosquitoes preceded you in the order of creation. You're not that big of a deal. And I just love that. And just one other, I think, thing that comes to mind with the idea of being creatures and being connected and a part of this larger thing we call nature is that beautiful passage from Romans 8 where Paul is talking about what the new creation will be, or like waiting for the resurrection. He talks about creation itself groaning. This idea that whatever the resurrection is, and Karen touched on this beautifully, whatever it is, it's going to involve more than just ourselves. It's going to involve all materiality in some way. And then the second concept is around stewardship, and whether it's in Jesus's parables, for example, one of the go-to images that he goes to are parables about stewards. And that's a reminder about our faith and being stewards in a spiritual sense or being stewards of the church, but it extends, of course, much further towards our relationship with creation. And for me, this is always connected with our own sense of mortality, right? Nature was here before any of us, and it will be here afterwards, in the same way that whether it's our own personal wealth, or whether it's our human family, or whether it's the church, these are things that extend before and after us. And so in between, we're never the true owner of it. All we ever are is stewards of anything in our life. And this then extends further, and particularly towards nature, in terms of thinking about the generations that preceded us and then the generations to come. And I think just one thing I want to touch on too is, and I liked how Boykin put this, so much of the great work of this committee, and I think these ideas, these, I think, theological ideas around creation, can be so much the water we swim in that we don't always notice it. And so just drawing your attention to ways in which in our liturgy, bits and pieces that are always pointing towards this. I mean, at the most fundamental level, it's whenever we recite the creed at any Eucharist, when we say that God is the creator of all things, right? It's a important, I think those words can just come off of our lips and think about it like, oh, God created me, but like, no, God created all things in a much more comprehensive sense. We have a variety of Eucharistic prayers, but one of the ones that we have in the rotation throughout the year here is Eucharistic Prayer C, which has these very cosmic ideas of creation, and has that line about this earth, our island home, this very kind of beautiful and vulnerable picture of what it's like to be here on planet Earth. And finally, anytime we have a baptism or we renew our baptismal vows, which happens at least 6 times a year, if not more often than that, there is an additional pledge in these times when we renew our baptismal covenant and say that we will do things with God's help. I will with God's help. There is a special pledge in terms of pledging as part of our Christian baptismal life to protect and to renew creation and nature. And that's something that appears in all of our liturgies whenever we do baptisms. And so I offer those to you as just little points as we go through the cycle of the liturgical year to mark in your brain and to not let those go by without doing a little bit deeper reflection on this topic. So back to you, Neil.
Thank you, Keith. We appreciate all the support that you've given to us, and those words are, again, right on target. We're going to, I might say I've got 2 handouts here, but we don't want you reading them while we're speaking. So one handout is let me just get it. Which would be a follow-up to Keith's presentation, is a Catechism of Creation, an Episcopal Understanding. And I found this recently. It was actually published in June 2005 by the Study in Congregations by the Committee on Science, Technology, and Faith of the Executive Council of the Episcopal Church of the United States of America. Who knew? But it has wonderful references to biblical references and how the Episcopal Church interprets those references, because obviously many interpretations of Bible passages are possible. So I'll try to make sure that you pick one up as you leave. We're going to transition now to a look at the beliefs and principles of Native Americans. And I think it's appropriate first to acknowledge that we are on the traditional land of the Occaneechi Band of the Saponi Nation. I'm going to share with you some quotes. If I don't hold it upside down, Tom, it'll work. 2 arrows. I'm going to open with a couple of quotes from Robin Wall Kimmerer, who wrote Braiding Sweetgrass. The full title is Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teaching of Plants. I don't know if any of you have read that book or heard of that book, but among those of us who are in the environmental issues, it's one of the most, maybe perhaps the most popular book currently out there. And there are 2 copies in our library if you would like to borrow one. Robin Wall Kimmerer is a Potawatomi botanist, author, and the director of the Center for Native Peoples and the Environment at the State University of New York College of Environmental Science and Forestry. She was awarded a MacArthur Fellowship, which we know as a Genius Grant, in 2022. And so as a scientist and a Native American, her work is informed by both Western science and indigenous environmental knowledge. So, again, I have another handout you can get later with some quotes from her book, but I wanted to share 2 quotes with you today, and then we'd like to open up for some discussion with you about both what you heard in the sermon, what you heard from Father Keith, and what you're reading from Robin Wall Kimmerer. So in this first quote, since I have the microphone, I'll go ahead and read it. In the Western tradition, there is a recognized hierarchy of beings, with, of course, the human being on top, the pinnacle of evolution, the darling of creation, and the plants at the bottom. But in native ways of knowing, human people are often referred to as the younger brothers of creation. We say that humans have the least experience with how to live, and thus the most to learn. We must look to our teachers among the other species for guidance. Their wisdom is apparent in the way that they live. They teach us by example. They've been on the earth far longer than we have been and have had time to figure things out. It's very keeping with the earlier remarks. And the second quote, each person, human or no, is bound to every other in a reciprocal relationship. Just as all beings have a duty to me, I have a duty to them. If an animal gives its life to feed me, I am in turn bound to support its life. If I receive a stream's gift of pure water, then I am responsible for returning a gift in kind. An integral part of a human's education is to know those duties and how to perform them. Gets into the stewardship issue. I think this goes a bit beyond stewardship because you see it's a two-way relationship. And again, it's not a hierarchical relationship. But nature, we need to take care of nature, not that necessarily it would be fine if we weren't here, right? But we need to we need to care for all of God's creation. But nature, we are dependent upon what nature gives back to us. And we need to be appreciative of what nature gives to us. This concept was mentioned in a session yesterday. Person said, maybe I need to change my blessing when before our meal, that not only we're thanking God, but we're thanking the plants and the animals or the fish that sacrifice their lives for our nourishment. So I'll stop there, and I think with the size of the group, we can maybe just take some comments from all of you about. Thank you, Tom. And we're going to pose 3 questions to you. How can we as Christians show our love for God's creation, and what can we do to care for it? How can we more sensibly and sensitively use the resources we take from the earth and still meet the needs of 8 billion people and the non-human population? And how can we create a greater sense of the urgency for the need to change current lifestyles and priorities? It's a lot. But
I know these are big questions. So if people have responses, I want to run around a microphone so that we can hear your thoughts.
Thank you. Boykin. Who wants to kick us off? As a teacher, we know we have to wait. Wait time, right, Carol?
I'm not sure whose hand might go first.
Go ahead.
Geographically, you're first.
Okay. On the first one, I guess I'm thinking of an educational model too. I think, Neil, it's, for me, the analogy of swimming in the water, thinking about the water we swim in, it's an awareness. I don't need to necessarily read every book on the topic, but somehow or another I need to find a way to daily, weekly for sure, but maybe even daily during even my prayer time, make myself more aware of what's really happening. I used to do that with my professional readings with savage inequality and things like that, but I have not done that as a human at all. So for me, it's the first thing that I think as a Christian I need to do is to be deeply aware of what is happening and choose my response that I can make as an individual, and then in joining with people at the church with a concerted effort.
Thank you.
And boy, those 17-year cicadas will remind you. I went outside last night and I was like, what is happening? Where was the other?
Keith probably already alluded to this, but I think about our baptismal covenant, right? And such that when each person is being baptized, and as each of us is renewing our own baptismal covenant, that our fundamental orientation as humans who are creatures of God is to be in relationship with and care for God's creation. And so sometimes that looks like having the volunteers who will help us shift our waste stream. Have you all already talked about that here? Maybe a little bit later. Okay, great.
Stacy? Half a hand there. Half raised, we take that.
One thing to consider that I think about is, sure, there are things that we individually can do to make some changes, but in the bigger picture, it's much more of a collective, and looking at, I can recycle everything or never drive a car again, and it doesn't really make the impact that changing, and this goes to, I guess, the third point, to changing what happens on a larger scale with bigger corporations and different things like that. And so how do we do that kind of work, which is harder than, using a push mower instead of a riding lawnmower, right? Like,
That we'll be getting back to that question. There was another.
I was just going to say that I think it's a very complex issue. I spent yesterday 9 hours in the yard weeding, and much of the time I was going, is this a weed or is this a plant? And worried that maybe I was ripping up something good because I couldn't distinguish the difference. And when I went out to the yard, there were 4 deer that sprung through, and they went immediately through my garden. And I think because they heard me, they carried on. But if they hadn't heard me, I could see evidence where they had eaten things down. And I was in the garden thinking, okay, do I put deer defense on these plants so they're not going to eat down my beautiful garden? I couldn't decide what to do. And I got great joy out of all the time I spent out there, even though my back was quite sore this morning. And it just caused me to think about the kinds of things that, well, what can I do? What should I do? And the other thing that happened this past week, I was sitting there on Sunday night, last Sunday night, and I had done my New York Times connections, and I was feeling so good, like my mind wasn't really totally gone yet. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw something, and I looked, and there was a mouse that ran right past me, ran underneath my bed and into the closet in our bedroom. And I thought, now just calm your... Well, the first thing I did was, Craig, Craig, Craig. And they go, what is it, Deanne? And he rushes back and he reassures me, and I'm saying, but where there's one, there's got to be two. And anyway, I'm sitting there just trying to be calm, and just, 15 minutes later, another mouse comes down the hall from the other direction, goes under the bed the other way, and that night I had the most terrible dreams. And then I'm trying to decide, okay, how do I get rid of these mice? And I don't like the thought of killing things, but I don't like the thought of not sleeping for the rest of my life because I'm awake, waiting till they come. So I say all that not to say that I have any answers, but it's complicated to exactly how you get along. So I welcome hearing other people's thoughts on what we can do to live in harmony and not to be scared to death. Now, my friend Alice, who knows a lot about this stuff but rarely says anything, so you better listen up because I'm sure it's good.
I'd sort of like to touch back on what Carol said, and I'm never one to use these things, so technologically impaired. And also a little bit of what Deanne said. I think one of the key things is being aware. I cannot remember which individual said this, but that if slaughterhouses were made of glass, no one would eat. And I would encourage you, if you're not familiar, particularly with our systems of raising livestock, they are, in short, horrific. If you don't know what a farrowing crate is, there are a number of websites that will show you a mother pig and her piglets. I know about pigs to some degree. My male pigs will gather things to make a nest. So think about a mother pig and her piglets and learn about farrowing crates. I think anytime animals are used as commodities, we are violating what God has given us. They are sentient, they are God's creatures, and we just treat them, as some of this said earlier, as just something for us to use. And I would encourage all of you to be aware. As I said, the agricultural system is very big. It's problematic because people eat it. A number of years ago, the Humane Society of the United States tried to start a campaign of breakfast of suffering. And they ended up having to backtrack on that because people were so upset. But again, I would challenge all of you to become aware of how we treat animals as a commodity. And that can change. Many years ago, there was not much concern about how products were made, such as cosmetics, medications, lotions, that type of thing. That is changing. In the grocery store, you will see things that say they're cruelty-free. But I encourage all of you to be aware of how human beings are treating this sentient part of God's creation and how we can do better.
Thank you. I think Martha was going to.
This is sort of silly, but Deanne reminded me of the fact that in retirement, and for me, and before we moved over here to Chapel Hill almost 4 years ago, I spent my life weeding, and I loved it. We would never have used a chemical to take care of weeds, but I planted lots of hellebores, also known as Lenten roses, in our yard. And the first year that we had them, these little things that looked exactly like the weeds that I knew to weed. So I weeded away all the new baby hellebores that first year, and then I realized that they were the new plants, and we had a front yard full of hellebores, and that the new owners, took out. I mean, they really did away with our trees and with our hellebores. But it just the weeding reminded me of a happy memory, which was to weed. I loved weeding.
Just a quick word about how we treat our animals. Tomorrow night at the Chelsea Art Theater, there's a documentary showing of the smell of money. And afterwards, there's going to be a panel discussion and Q&A. This is an 80-minute film on the hog industry in eastern North Carolina and the terrible health impacts the industry provides by means of these waste, how they dispose of animal waste. So if you have time, 7 o'clock at the Chelsea Art Theater, you can go on the line to the website for the Chelsea Art Theater and reserve your seats. It's free. Just thought I'd mention that in response to what you said.
And there are several films this month at the Chelsea that are on the environment. I encourage you to go to their website and look at the other films as well. One image, if I could say, could share is that I'm certainly trying to, and I have reduced my meat consumption, especially beef, and especially pork, but when I go to the grocery store and see a pork chop sitting there, I have this image of driving down the interstate and seeing a tractor trailer full of hogs going to slaughter, and it helps me not pick up that pork chop. And of course, pork is a huge issue in North Carolina because, as you said, not only the inhumane treatment of the animals, but the implications for people as well, who are the poorest, among the poorest people in the state, who are living with and next to hog farms. And just to put one more measure of guilt on us, what we don't recycle and we don't compost that goes to the landfill, as you may know, it doesn't go to our landfill anymore. We ended that, which was appropriate, but it goes to Sampson County, which is in the middle of the hog-producing country, so the state, the area. So not only are these individuals mostly people of color and living in poverty, subjected to the hog farms, but they're also subjected to one of the biggest landfills in the southeastern United States, and that's where anytime we put things in our trash, that's where it's going. Cricket?
I am an animal lover, and very difficult to think of eating them. That came along voluntarily. I don't know really when it happened, a very long time ago. But I would like to say that I too have a garden, a yard. I do have deer and rabbits and birds of all kinds. And I try to have a garden. I want a garden also. But through the years, having witnessed the deer and their families, they're a very tight family, and year after year the offspring come and they grow up, and I watch them become the leaders and so forth. They only keep about a 3-mile radial distance, no bigger than that. I can't help but, and the birds and the rabbits and whatever it is, if we can take time to be aware of them, as Robin talked about in her book, to be aware of them, that they live here with us. This is their home as well. if we can give them a moment, if we observe them and begin to understand a little bit better how they fit into the environment that we are sort of eroding for them and taking away from them all the time, then maybe we can appreciate a little bit better who they are and why they are here. If we don't, they'll all be gone. They'll be someplace else maybe, but maybe not in abundance anymore. But isn't that the way we're treating everything? Trees, each other, you know, just if it's a nuisance, you get rid of it. And we just can't live on this earth with that attitude. It's all here for me. Well, it's really not. Anyway,
thank you.
I have some suggestions if you.
Got everything. As you go into Barbara's back here, but just as we're on the land of the Occaneechi, we're also we're in the territory of the deer. They are all these creatures were here before we were. We are the intruders. So when a deer is intruding on your yard, no, it's the other way around. Barbara?
Yes, just wanted to share. We knew this was coming, but in having a quick read of the paper this morning, there is a big article on the fact that the university is doing away with, realigning, reemphasizing whatever, diversity, equity, and inclusion. We don't know what that's going to entail. It's just a report from an executive committee of the Board of Governors. But we have close feelings about the university and this church. Maybe we can work a little bit with the people we know to talk about utilizing some of those funds, and they surely are going to be, I'm sure, redirected to the area of caring for our earth. It's very important to our young students and how they lead their lives and how we can help them with all of that. I know we're talking about how we as Christians can do that, but our culture, our world, our creation is everything. And so perhaps we could work with the university a little bit in this area and see if we can build some relationships.
Thank you. I'm going to move into the final portion of our program. I want to thank you for your participation. It's super. This is the good news part. Have about 5 slides. So this first slide is a slide about life expectancy going back to the 1700s up to the current day. And it's rather amazing that you go back 100 years and the life expectancy across the world was 34 years. And today it's 70. That's pretty amazing. And with the United States, I believe 100 years ago, which is when my father was born, life expectancy was 58. And today it's, I think, 70, 77. Huge increase in our country. So that's sort of a good news, bad news picture. Good news is that people are living longer. Much of that's attributable to infant mortality decreasing so sharply. The bad news is we've moved from 1 billion people 200 years ago to 8 billion today. And we're not here to talk about, that's actually predicted to begin to level off, fortunately. But you can imagine the demand on our natural resources going in that number of people, as well as all the benefits that we have, that we enjoy. This is, well, how are we doing with fuel consumption? We know that burning fossil fuel is the primary driver of greenhouse gases. And so on a per capita basis, you can see that the United States is leading the pack, of course. We consume the most. We consume it, meaning we are using it. And but the good news is that since about 1980, the per capita has been decreasing. But when you factor in population increase, the net change is actually an increase. And I was encouraged to see countries like France and Denmark, where they have reduced their per capita consumption from about 40,000 to 20,000 kilowatt hours since about 1985. So it's doable. This isn't impossible to do, but you have to have the will and the government regulations and policies in place to make this happen. We see China being the one that's increasing. That's, their society is becoming a bit more affluent, which is probably good for them, but that increases their consumption. In terms of renewable energy generated, great news here. Of course, hydropower, it's pretty amazing how much that has continually increased. But we focus on wind and solar, which were virtually non-existent 20 years ago, and for solar even more recently than that. And you can see the geometric increases in wind and solar. That obviously needs to increase and ultimately replace the carbon-based fuels. And installed energy capacity, again, looking at the solar arena, the increase, you can see how, again, a dramatic increase primarily since about 2010. That curve's getting steeper for the world. China is by far the leader in solar, both in producing it and using it. Hopefully the curve for other countries needs to begin to look more like China's than it does at the current time. This is a look at change in the forest area across the world. This is a net of trees removed and trees planted. And we see that in South America, Africa, where rainforests are, Indonesia, rainforests, we're depleting those, and that can't continue. The good news here is that you see countries like China and India and even Russia that have had a net gain since 2015, and we're kind of holding steady.
Is it true it's no data? There's no data for the United States? Yes.
Did it say that? Did I say that?
It's in Australia.
I thought I saw another graph where it was basically flat, and that's probably about right. Gotta plant those trees. Of course, we burned down a lot of them. So this was the last slide. This was really a feel-good slide. We hear so much about our whales and other marine life, and so I was amazed to see this, that going back to 1960, about 700,000 whales were being killed, and now it's still, what's it look like, 20,000 or so. Not that we want to dismiss 20,000 as an important number, but great strides have been made, and I think it's just an example that if you have the will, if we have the will, we can make incredible changes. It's not technology that's holding us back. It's not like we don't know what to do, but we have to have the will to do it. And that's where you get into cultural change and spiritual change. And as Stacey said, it's not just the technological changes, not just the things we can do in our household, which are all important, but we have to look at the bigger picture and have a larger impact if we're going to be successful. So in closing, again, thank you. I'm going, if you could, I'm going to maybe Kathy and I can maybe stand at the door and give you handouts as you leave. Again, I'd remind you we have Kimmer's book in the library. We have a shelf of Creation Care books that you're welcome to borrow. And again, we encourage you to go to the films and maybe see you at the walk this afternoon. Tom?
I'd like to make just a couple of additional comments about
Wait a minute.
Just a couple of additional comments about China. The Chinese government leaders are, for the most part, trained as engineers. And with the Great Leap Forward after World War II, they started investing in solar hot water systems because people did not have hot water heaters in their homes. If they wanted hot water, they took water in a pot and boiled it on top of the stove. So part of their Great Leap Forward involved using solar hot water systems for a vast amount of their population. And at one point, by about 1990, over half of their population was getting their hot water from solar. Now, the solar PV has taken off in China, and they are the world's largest installer of solar PV. And so even though their use of fossil fuels has been increasing, if you notice the last couple of years it's tapering off. So let's give some credit to China for moving forward on renewables.
Thank you to the Creation Care Committee, and see you next week and the week after.